Hi folks. So let's talk analysis with William Faulkner's A Rose for Emily. Now this story is told in Faulkner's typical sort of fragmented, out of order style in terms of the plot. And an interesting note about this story is that Emily is the focus, right? The story is called A Rose for Emily. But from the first 5 words of the story, Emily's dead. The first 5 words of the story are when Miss Emily Grierson died. So we know already that the narrator time is going to be after her death, and the plot time sort of tracks back through the course of her life. Now, and something important to note about the narrator in this story is that we have this collective we. So, for example, at one point the narrator says, so the next day we all said she will kill herself, and we said it would be the best thing. Now, who is that we? The we is the townspeople. And this is our unreliable narrator unit. So you want to think about, what does that collective unreliable narrator do here? Well, they are telling the story of Emily's life, but how do they feel about Emily? What sort of opinions do they have about Emily? How much do they really know about Emily? And largely that answer appears to be not much. All of this narrative of her life appears to come from town gossip and assumptions. The only conversation that's had with Emily is between the aldermen when they come to collect her taxes, and between her and the druggist. And nobody really questions her or checks on her, has a relationship with her. So all of these assumptions about what happened and why are coming from the unreliable voice of the townspeople, this first-person internal narrator that represents a collective group of people who doesn't really know. And so that characterization of Emily is going to be influenced by that, and that characterization of the conflict is going to be influenced by the narrator in the story. Now, as far as Emily's early life, we know that when her father was alive, that there was some sort of oppression or restriction on her and her ability to sort of date and have a social life. It does describe Emily's father at one point by saying, describing a tableau, saying Mrs. Emily, a slender figure in white in the background, her father a spraddled silhouette in the foreground, his back to her and clutching a horsewhip, the two of them framed by the back-flung front door. When she got to be 30 and was still single, we were not pleased, but vindicated. Even the insanity in the family, she wouldn't have turned down all of her chances if they had really materialized. So the narrator is saying, when she was 30 and she was still single, we were glad that we were right, that there was something wrong with Emily. But this is coming directly after this characterization of a portrait where her father is very directly and metaphorically standing as this sort of barrier to her and the social life outside of her family. He's also clutching a horsewhip. Now, of course, that horsewhip is symbolic of his control over her, but it also is a historical and cultural context marker indicating that their family was a member of the plantation class, and that would be the reason that he was holding a horsewhip, was they would have owned enslaved people. You also see throughout the plot that the narrator is aware of many elements of foreshadowing that indicate something bad is going to happen or something dramatic is going to happen between Emily and Homer. They mention the smell outside of her house, and instead of anybody, going to check on Emily about it, they just sort of cover it up. They mention her going to talk to the druggist, and instead of anybody checking on that, they just sort of turn a blind eye. And it isn't until Emily's finally gone that they are able to determine what it is that had happened to Homer. Now, we also get indications that Emily is going to have a very strange relationship with death. When her father dies, she refuses to believe it, and she doesn't let them come get her body, and she says, oh, my father's not dead. Now, of course, this tells us that she is not well, right? She is in some form of delusion or some sort of stunted psychology. But this also tells us that she's going to have a weird thing about death. And that, of course, comes up much later when we find out what happened to Homer. Now, in the conclusion of the story, often readers are able to predict sort of what is going to happen, or that he is going to be the victim of sort of Emily's perversion. But what is often surprising to readers is what's revealed in the last few paragraphs, which is that she's been sleeping with his corpse for probably decades at this point. Now, this is, of course, all complicated by Emily's relationship with Toby. Toby is the black man that lives at her house, and it's a reasonable assumption that Toby would have been a formerly enslaved person at the former Grierson estate, and it did happen that people in that situation would stay on with their families. He's likely known Emily since she was a child. Yet, throughout all of this, he is the only one that she has a relationship with. And he doesn't really talk to the outside community, and there are valid historical and cultural reasons for that. If he were to do that, and they were to discover this dead body, that could be very dangerous for him during this period of time. But also, you notice that, he stays with her up until the moment that she dies. And then in section 5, he meets the first of the ladies at the front door and lets them in. And with hushed, sibilant voices and their quick, curious glances, he disappeared. He walks right out of the house and was never seen again. So he's sort of here, protecting her, caring for her, the only person who really knows her, and by all accounts he seems to only be here for her sake. Now, considering Emily's problematic relationship with male figures in her life, that's significant to note. And in your video notes, you'll explore an alternative exploration into their relationship that I think is worthy of consideration in terms of who Emily is and who Toby is and what that relationship means. Ultimately, though, the question remains, why does Emily kill Homer? And, well, that depends on what you think. There are all sorts of different conclusions. Obviously, she's got some sort of delusion or psychosis related to her father figure. Some people think this is as severe as, necrophilia. Some people think this is, just an identity disorder. Some people think that it is just a delusion. But what we do know about Emily from a literary standpoint is that she is resistant to change at a pathological level. She refuses to hang numbers for the postman. She refuses to accept that she owes taxes. She refuses to accept that her father is dead. She refuses to accept that, her and Homer do not have a future together. So regardless of what the cause of that is, Emily is sort of a monument to this resistance to change that was going on at the South at the time, and this generation that is literally dying out and decaying, in physical and psychological forms at a time when, the rest of the community is trying to push forward, but also not really doing anything to intervene in that decay of that situation. Now, coming back to the title, A Rose for Emily, what does that mean? Well, roses have conventional symbolism in literature. One piece of that symbolism is romance, of course, which could relate to her relationship with Homer. Another interpretation of a rose is mortality, the idea of death. And both of those apply to this story, right? Faulkner himself said that the title is about giving Emily a rose, giving her a tribute. Well, considering what Emily is symbolic for, you want to think about what that means. Is he pitying Emily in a sort of, tributary way? Is he glorifying something about Emily that's a little bit problematic? Is he criticizing Emily's views? And how are we supposed to react to Emily? She's a complicated character. There is not a lot to admire about her. But at the same time, we're only getting this version of her from a narrator that wouldn't have a flattering thing to say about her anyway. So we can't really understand what it is that drove Emily to do what she did. And that's probably one of the most important parts of the unreliable narrator in the story.